All right. So I think having the internet cable damaged on this day, which has never happened before, is already an event in itself. And we may be wondering as to why, but we can still do this. It's not like the phone is cut off and we can't reach anybody anymore. So thank you, Roma, for your hotspot. So this part of our conference will clearly have much more questions to you than my answers. It is very, very much a work in progress, as you will see immediately, but nevertheless, this is something I felt I would personally, and perhaps the whole project and topic, would immensely benefit from a brainstorming. So we can try to do that in half an hour or so that we have devoted for it. It would be wonderful. Tamizdat project is, as they say it in digital humanities, a virtual environment that traces the history of first publications and reception of Russian literature outside the USSR by collecting, organizing, and annotating a variety of sources that shape the industry of Tamizdat, thereby making them, these sources, available to the international academic community and students of Russian literature worldwide. It explores, in a research-oriented and learning environment, the historical and socio-cultural climate in which these masterpieces of Russian literature first appeared abroad, before they could see the light of day at home after Perestroika. And although historically the project is finite, this website, Tamizdat project, is clearly an ever-growing initiative as its scope is constantly expanding, despite being limited to these several decades of the second half of the 20th century. Something that we have not mentioned, and maybe this is the main reason for our conference, in fact, is that if you think of it, nearly everything we teach in 20th century Russian courses on 20th century Russian literature was first published abroad. And this website gathers a representative compendium, but gallery, accompanied, equipped with academic apparatus of these works. And we will be hearing more about other publications in tomorrow's panels. And this presentation of mine right now, I hope will serve as a as yet another bridge. We keep talking of bridges to not a virtual but an actual book exhibition that we are opening officially in a few hours on the third floor of the library, curated by Alla Roylands. So the first question is how difficult or easy, logical or illogical is this site in terms of its navigation. So let me just try very quickly to guide you through. The authors, well, let me use the Russian version if possible, because Ahmadulina is, just because her last name starts with A, appears first on the English version, as you see, and only then does Akhmatova, or Aksionov, or Amalik, or Pitov. No, let's stick with Akhmatov. The authors appear on the left-hand side menu alphabetically, followed by, as I said, it's very incomplete and hollow inside, but so far you see an anthology from the early years of the 60s, Приглушенные голоса, Hushed Voices, Metropole Almanac, which has been mentioned more than once today, Советская потаенная муза, okay, here they are.
Yasha, Metropole has a mistake.
It has.
Okay.
This is by far not the only one.
Sorry. Oh, now it does it.
Okay, in the Russian it's better. So, Metropole, приглушенные голоса. The principle is that, well, it's hard to. These are collective editions, so but not periodical ones. They will the almanacs and anthologies. Ilya Kopu is going to tell us tomorrow about Konstantin Kuzminsky's Голубая Laguna, anthology of contemporary Russian poetry, and it will, with time, be featured here as well. A click on the author, and here I would like to use Lydia Chukovskaya as an example. A click on the author takes you to this author's webpage. Again, this should have an encyclopedic entry of who Chukovskaya is, clearly. Underneath, featured underneath are Tamizdat editions, издания of her. They are not in any logical order right now, but of course they should be in perhaps chronological order, but perhaps not, and this is something that I would love to hear more from you about. The website does have the ability to have those Tamizdat editions on display. That is, here, it's theoretically, I'm not saying legally, but theoretically it is possible to have a PDF or a viewer of this book edition, which with the modified title, right? As I mentioned in my paper just now, it's called Sofia Petrovna, but first published under the title Опустелый дом. Рецензии, переписка, документы, or reviews, correspondence, and documents. I have been talking with Ilya, and I still do not know how to refer to everything else that is not correspondence or reviews, because correspondence and reviews are in genre definitions, while documents could be any. They should include diary entries, excerpts from memoirs, legal documents perhaps, statements, letters to the editors. Under reviews, use the Russian here. So if you click on reviews, you see responses or отзывы. It would be probably better to call them, to a particular specific edition as they appear in chronological order. For example, the first known to me, first known response to Опустелый дом, Sofia Petrovna, is by a certain Yuri Bolshukhin, which you can expand and roll back up. But you can also open it and see the original. Well, I'm sorry, this is a very amateur picture, but ideally these should be higher quality scans of newspapers, which is very difficult because of their format. Or if it's correspondence, these are excerpts from correspondence found in the archive that discusses the publication of this or that work. Okay, so the idea is that the materials are assembled in chronological order, which supposedly is supposed, I should say, I'm not saying it does, but it's supposed to give a stereoscopic history of the publication of this or that work of Russian literature in Tamizdat. Now, this is as far as the authors are concerned. Personali, or profiles, is everyone but the authors. Everyone else who participates in the publication process. It includes personali or profiles. They will include, of course, you see Georgy Adamovich immediately. He is certainly an author, but according to the logic of this website, he is not an author of Tamizdat. He is an author of emigre literature, of the Parisian note.
Yes.
While at the same time being an active reviewer of works smuggled out of the Soviet Union, including Solzhenitsyn and including Shalamov, for whom he writes the first known review of Shalamov's Kolyma tales.
But
So
Brodsky
everyone,
is.
sorry?
But Brodsky is. I see Brodsky.
I'm sorry, I forgot to delete Brodsky from here.
Brodsky всегда с нами.
No, Brodsky should not be here.
Yeah.
It's a digital typo, consider it a digital typo. Thank you, Ilya. So some of them have pictures, some don't, and of course this immediately brings us to the question of copyrights. Which with photographs is especially difficult because we do not often know who took the picture, and it is the photographer who holds the copyright. Unlike, well, unless it's very secret and anonymous, we wouldn't know who authored the text, but usually pen names are, as we know from the Sinyavsky and Daniel process, they are sooner or later exposed. So profiles or personae ultimately include smugglers, couriers, critics, reviewers, publishers, typesetters, everyone else who figures in this corpus of accompanying documents, including reviews, correspondence, and everything else. Publishers, this is far from complete, but if you look at Argus, again, there will be an encyclopedic entry on what Argus was. One second. The bibliographical information appears like this. Not so much in the English version of the website yet, but it will be there eventually. So the idea of open web pages by publisher is to have a gallery representative of the works of the editions that this or that publisher brought out. And once again, well, Argus comes about in the 70s, but for example, Пять континентов, where is it here, which publishes Sofia Petrovna under the modified title for the first time in 1965, again pulls up all mentions of this publishing house from the website and arranges it in chronological order, with the first being, in this case, a letter of Boris Filipov to Roman Gul about possible arrangements of having that same text, brought out as a book edition following the first serialized edition in Roman Gul's journal, Novy Journal. This project kind of sinks, never materializes, as you see again from, so here, well, this is why. You can read this later. Same idea here with the periodical editions, which are perhaps even more important, especially in the context of Russian literary history with the thick journals, and which often feature first serialized publications before a separate book-length edition comes out. But sometimes these things are parallel. So, for example, Requiem is published for the first time in a book form in 1963. And then in 64, a different redaction, another forum comes out in the journal Grani. So obviously I forgot to say that this project is supported by the CUNY Research Foundation, namely by the PSC CUNY Enhanced Research Award, which I was fortunate to receive 2 years ago. And which is pretty much expires in a few days. So it was enough to build the website and to work with the designer, which was an extremely interesting kind of intellectual challenge. Just thinking of how do you arrange this immense amount of information, visual, text, verbal, and but what still remains to be thought through is, of course, the logic and, well, superficial issues, but very important ones like copyright, as well as the how to make it user-friendly, how not to get lost in this virtual environment. So I know very well the project that Anne Kamaromi curates or runs, which is devoted to Tamizdat periodicals. And it's absolutely fascinating to actually see them on the website of the University of Toronto. So, if you could just ask me the questions. We've been talking with Ilya about the ultimate purpose. Why do we need this? This is something I would perhaps like to ask you instead. Why do we need this pool of information in addition to the pictures, to images, which are of course nice to look at? Especially that these books are becoming more and more antiquated. They are not exactly very expensive avant-garde editions of the 1930s, 20s and 30s or earlier, but nevertheless these are rare books. So yes, Jessie. And Jessie will be speaking about her online project tomorrow.
It's not on this scale. And maybe this is your question too. How much metadata do you have on each edition? Like what do you have about,
Well,
what kind
first
of
tell me what
description?
metadata is.
How much information do you have describing the, I don't know, provenance, let's say, or where it comes from, or? Like, for example, I see Institut Literatsky, and I'm wondering, like, well, this was published in Paris by the Kultura Press, this first edition, and why, and any description of the book history aspect, or anything?
Right, so, okay, I understand. So the idea is not to, even though I do curate this website, the idea is that it is not me who presents it. Everything around that edition that you saw on the front page, the idea is that its history is traced through first-hand epistolary texts, as well as other archival, unpublished or published pieces of evidence that I can find in the archives or in a published form, and arrange them for the user of this website to be able to make sense of, or not.
But can I ask,
Sure.
is there a history of publication anywhere when I click on the title, and do you have, like, it was published during March 15, 1965?
Well,
This press published it, and whatever.
So,
Do you have that little history there?
For each book.
so for example, here it would be biographical and bibliographical information on a certain author. I only have it for Shalamov right
But
now.
not for each title that you picture, right?
Not for each edition.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I
right.
click on the book, then I will not know the history of that particular.
But one
You
can
you
publish-
will if you read through the chain,
Okay.
which consists of two parallel tracks, right? So it's three. Right now, it's three chains of this first-hand historical evidence. One of them is Переписка, which I think is more the most has to do the most with the actual history of publication, rather than reviews, which have to do with the post history of publication. So.
Well,
mhm.
somebody who just wants to dip in and out, and without going through the chain.
Yeah.
Say you're getting ready for a lecture, just a little
Yeah.
something.
Okay, so what would help you're saying is a
Yeah.
summary.
So how
Mhm.
they
I can suggest
I'm sorry.
I can suggest something very simple, that besides the cover, you can also, offer the pages where you have the dates and, date of publication.
Title pages.
Yes.
Sure.
Well,
Mhm.
the date of publication, where, etc. So
It would be here, and there is.
you're planning on it. Makes
I
sense.
do. Yeah. Again, something that we just brainstormed with Ilya Kuku yesterday. I would not want, ideally, to turn this website into an electronic library, especially
I understand,
given
but-
that the first Tamizdat publications are very often, should we call them, deficient textologically,
Yes.
starting with the title,
Right.
right? So you do not want to encourage uninitiated user to be reading masterpieces or canonical works of Russian literature in an unauthorized, inauthentic.
Well, I wasn't suggesting having
But,
the text.
sure, but
I
the
meant,
title pages.
the title page.
Yeah.
And also the page where you have the year and the publisher. Sometimes they're not on the title
This is
page.
an excellent.
Or you just take that information and provide it,
It is in my plan as of now.
Yeah.
May I ask you, I think that one of the most interesting, I would say, stories is how this or that manuscript has been smuggled to the West or somewhere. So how people manage to get it, because I think it's very important.
Yes.
Through diplomats or something else in the world, because it's part of the history.
Uh-huh.
Could we also have this short description somewhere,
A
the
road
story
map.
of a manuscript?
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
The roadmap, the journey.
A road map,
Yeah.
and I am
Yeah.
thinking of supplementing this website with an actual map. Perhaps I don't know how this is done, but a map that you collect when you use Uber, you see where it's something along
There are
these
quite
lines.
a lot of stories,
Yeah.
sometimes
Mhm.
witnesses who said that they helped to, or something.
Yes.
I think that's very important.
Sure, and especially that we do have this information from correspondence,
Yeah.
like this one. Я недавно вернулся из Советского Союза, writes Clarence Brown to Роман Гуль. Как вы, возможно, знаете, но как вы точно не знаете, я также привез с собой рукопись, которая может иметь взрывное значение. Мне бы хотелось показать ее вам. Я уже предложил английский перевод. etc. And then we find out that
But sometimes, people don't have time
To read
to read it,
Mhm,
all the things,
mhm.
especially you'll have to translate it into English and it will take ages. But I would say that the short description, it was brought by diplomats, something like that in a way, and somehow I think it's
as if it were an introduction to this.
exactly.
Exactly, I agree.
Thank you.
And one more question: Are you thinking in future to put here all type of research?
Yes, I'm thinking of
Including the conferences,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
that's,
this top menu should have статьи, research. Of course, it also has проекты, новости, news, but
Yeah.
absolutely agree. Yeah, this can, for now, can go into bibliography by author, by a profile, personalia, or by edition even. But true, it has to have this kind of academic counterpart, kind of vision of this book publishing reality through the lens of an academic research. Rob?
I want to say that, first of all, you've obviously done a tremendous amount of work on this. I think it's really extraordinary already. So, I'm curious, is this information that you sort of crowdsourced, or did you do all of this research yourself? And moving forward, how will you, if people want to contribute to the site, what will be the mechanism for doing that?
Of course it is impossible to do it single-handedly, or it needs kind of calls for research institute, but I have been very fortunate to have a few very generous volunteers, but ideally, well, it's after all the question of funding, and especially for the English translations of this pool of verbal information. There is an example I just bring up all the time is this fascinating website called Prozhita, which is devoted to the electronic publications of, here it is, of diaries. So lived through, oh, it's not working. Now it's here. Which is curated by Misha Milnichenko, who presented it at Hunter last winter. But he has, he's in Moscow, and he has over, I believe by now it's over 1,000 volunteers all over the country in different cities who type, who scan. Yeah, well, this is something that is not so easy to answer.
But at the moment, people would just have to contact you and say, I have this information I want to pass on to you, or?
I guess.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry. And
Yeah, this is a great project, and it seems to me that maybe part of the concept of what you're doing here and the contribution to methodology and thinking about Tamizdat is partly to put both authors and individual works very visibly contextualized within this publication history. And because I tend to think that all of the work that goes into a digital humanities project is also properly complemented by some print outputs, it would be great to see maybe some case studies centered on a particular well-known edition or work or on a well-known author that would present that history in just little companions to whatever it is. That would be one way of highlighting that concept and also giving people kind of case studies to think through Tamizdat editions that way and incorporate them in some ways more easily into teaching and further research.
yes, of course, this does not compete, is not supposed to with, should we call it a series of print editions arranged with same materials or expanded, actually annotated, commented upon materials around accompanying the publication of such and such work by such and such author. The series, if we imagine this hypothetical publication series, could start with Chicago. Or, again, this is something that I hope we can come back to tomorrow for our round table. What do you do with this? And how do you disseminate and popularize it? Jesse?
Yeah, it's a suggestion maybe in that direction. So what I like about it is that it is the opposite of a lot of DH projects in that it doesn't just extract information from a source and just quantify it, but it makes you read and discover and be a detective to find out really the context, which is very sympathetic to me as a literary scholar. So I'm imagining it not as a pedagogic project, but something that students could do, would be like, to use a fancy term here, game it, and create not the whole site, you leave it as it is, but you create some pathways for someone like a student to be guided and discover something, and then maybe even a place on the site where the output of that discovery could be.
Any students?
So, or or even like you mentioned maps, so maybe that could be an output that a student could find where a particular text had gone, and, create a map from. I'm just thinking of a way to engage. It has to be in a supervised way, so I don't think just anybody, just general crowdsourcing, but scholar sourcing, class sourcing, those kinds of projects could work with this if you provide some pathway for people, some suggestions as to how to interact with it. Your colleagues here would probably figure it out, but maybe someone coming to the field might not.
Right.
Yeah. So this should probably go somewhere in game it, as we say. Thank you so much.
No question, sorry. Just I'm thinking, because that's such a great project, so just while looking at it, you start imagining the future and how it will develop, which is very important because you need to put some new content on the time, otherwise, people will not follow the site. I wonder how the front page should be organized in a way, because whether the emphasis is put on the new research, so you present this new article dealing with this has appeared, and it should immediately be at the front page, or it's a static one, or it's somewhere else. So you mean how this site will be?
How it lives.
Yeah, how it lives. It should live. Otherwise, just a person comes once, just have a look at it, read little bits, and then go away. And what audience? That is students, researchers. Who is the main target? I would say.
Well, that has to, I would assume that would be broad, right? I would assume. But just to continue what you're saying, I was thinking of something similar. I've done 2 big websites, and I worked with students. I developed a seminar on the subject, and we created, Polina was part of one of the, I saw her somewhere, but
She's in the back. She's in the back.
Mapping Petersburg. But recently, what we're doing now is Russian writers at Berkeley, which is not the same, but at least somewhat similar. And I think it's very important to develop a group that is going to participate with you. And they brainstorm with you and so. So I assume you don't have a graduate program here, or do
We
you?
do have a graduate program
In
at the
Russian?
Graduate Center, GC.
Okay.
Uh,
So that's what I did. At Berkeley, it was relatively
Mhm.
easy because there were graduate
Mhm.
students. If not that, maybe a series, a bunch of colleagues, and you could,
You're-
Skype, there's
You're
so many.
reading my mind because I was going to conclude this part of the conference with an
colleagues.
invitation
Mhm.
to contribute, which of course is very time consuming and real work. But clearly all of us are specialists in something that others are not specialists in. And which includes authors, editions, topics, and certain geographies. One of us may be more versed in the French connection.
Exactly. You develop,
Yeah.
you have specialists, or, with graduate students, that's different. They become interested in something and follow that. But with colleagues, it's something else. And apropos what you have shown us, again, I have a question. You include old emigres, right? So, again, the whole question of defining Tamizdat,
Exactly.
that it remains, right? Adamovich,
The website
etc.
assumes a difference between.
So you need to articulate that. That's really important. That's part of someone, I think
Mhm.
you were, Irina, were saying something about what is the purpose, right? Who? So, okay. But you see, it's not just what is Tamizdat, because you personally have really pushed beyond Tamizdat. Today, at least, you have. Maybe, at least that's been my impression, and not only mine. A number of people responded to
I think that's the problem of the concepts.
Yeah,
How we are
articulate
thinking
it.
about,
Exactly.
if this project is going to be expanded. For instance, we're talking just during the coffee break. So if you decide in the future to include other types of Tamizdat, of the Eastern European, of Frankish Spain, which they had the same situation in the 50s, 30s, and 40s in a way. So how it will be constructed, though you'll be able to expand it without, just crushing the older and inventing one more. That's the problem, because it's a wonderful project, but I think it's quite complicated, in constructing the site. So you could add and expand,
Of course, this screen probably should be divided into two halves, one of which, at least two, if there can be more halves, but at least one of which would be Gossesdorf.
It's not so much a technical thing, but conceptual thing.
Conceptual.
Because if you formulate your concept with some idea of expanding in a way, so then you'll realize how it should be constructed, technically, either divided or not, what types of rubrication should be, something like that.
Following the trajectory of the absolute majority of the manuscripts that end up in Tamizdat being published as books or periodical publications, the source is the origin, is the attempts to have them published, or the lack of such attempts to have them published in Gossesdorf, right? That's where they all come from, which follows the logic, again, re-enhances the difference between what we call émigré literature and Tamizdat, which to me, I hope we can discuss this later tomorrow, but to me there is a major difference, if only geographical, but and it's relative, because Brodsky publishes, well, it's not him who publishes his first two books before he emigrates in '72, which I think qualifies his first two book editions as Tamizdat, but not so much what Ardis publishes later after he comes physically to Ann Arbor, which is open to discussion.
Sorry for torturing you, but I'm quite fascinated by the problem. What is the main aim of that? What is more important to you? The very idea of Tamizdat, in a way that it happens in modernity, especially because of the censorship. So this phenomenon suddenly occurs. The people have to find some other places to put the manuscript. Or your mom is simply just presenting what is going on, I would say, in the Russian continent. So it's, you may choose something else in a way, but what is the major topic and the major concept of this project?
I absolutely
This will
agree.
take time to define.
Yes,
but what may help
I
is
don't wait an answer, but just trying to understand how it will develop.
what may certainly help is to have the research the research component to this website. It will help us to conceptualize the phenomenon of what it means to publish to be geographically or physically separated from your manuscript, which migrates while you don't. Something along these lines. Or you do.
It's also kind of, we need to somehow maybe articulate and I'm not sure it was clearly articulated, one of the main goals of Tamizdat, because we talked, I'm sure it's kind of also for tomorrow discussion, I'm sure it will be present there, because at least how it was seen from the inside of the Soviet Union, even though maybe outside it wasn't the main purpose, but the main purpose of Tamizdat from the inside was to smuggle them back. And that's, to me, defined what Tamizdat is. And somehow it should be said, because otherwise, in here, I understand it's a Ruskaya literatura, but I see kind of lack of, I don't know, Father Alexander Main's books, at least, because they would fall into the same category of contemporaries who write inside, cannot be published inside, published there for the only purpose to bring those books or their copies. And also kind of this, how Tamizdat became, Tamizdat became Tamizdat, but Tamizdat became Samizdat. And that part of, I think it's very important.
Books were printed.
Yeah.
Printer machine and
Which
just
happened even
distributed
with
somewhere.
Well,
There's so many
I-
potential here.
okay, can I take one more question now and then we go to the ladies? Oh, Rosen. Or
Probably Jess's would be more meaningful, but I'm I'm a little worried that we might be defining this phenomenon a little too narrowly, with only the Russian reader in mind, in which case, we'll be cutting off a whole other set of readers, who might be, located elsewhere. And, there's also Tamizdat, Tamizdat that's not in Russian, right?
Are you talking about first publications or translations?
Translations.
Translations. Well, I'm afraid this is impossible.
But I do, Katie Clark has this term of sorry to, has this term of ecology, and I think we'll bring it out maybe in the panel on Gosses that Samizdat, but we should have. I'm in favor of much softer definitions that allow penetration of different types of texts and establishing relationships, which we might be cutting off with a very strict definition.
Okay, thank you so much, and please, even though it is not ready, it is as of now officially launched. So thank you for participating. And right now.